Okay, welcome everybody to episode 11 of Fostering Sustainable Innovation here at DX Leaders, a series on digital transformation. My name is Lars Födisch, former journalist and professional storyteller, and I'm your host together with Andreas Enderlin. Andreas, you're ready for a fantastic topic?
Absolutely, as always. Very interesting topic today, so very excited.
Okay, we have fantastic guests, a great topic, fostering sustainable innovation. Yeah? And just some stats to put things in perspective. Over 90% of companies consider innovative technology as necessary to reaching their digital transformation goals. And nearly 70% of global business leaders believe the future of business involves humans and AI working together, and hopefully we still can keep them apart. A reminder, as always, we have reserved substantial time for questions from the audience, and my recommendation, post your questions early, because otherwise later we might run out of time. Please use the Q&A function to post your questions or upvote other people's questions that you would like to be answered. Don't use the chat function, the Q&A function, okay? We'll hit it off in a moment, but Andreas wants to start giving us an update where we are with the DX Awards.
Yes, thank you, Lars, for that kind of introduction. So very quickly, I'm not going to spend too much time. One further, Clarissa, if you may. All right, so why are we here today? There is a good reason, and the reason is the Digital Transformation Award. And actually, as a matter of fact, Zuhlke was the first sponsor to sign up, and they're really been a tremendous support from the very beginning. So thank you to Zuhlke on behalf of the Swiss Cham for this incredible support. Yeah, so this Digital Transformation Award is basically about creating a platform for SME startups and MNCs to showcase their initiatives, what they have been doing. And you know, we started at the beginning of the year, pre-pandemic, so we were very, let's say, futuristic in what we saw coming, but digital transformation was obviously already on the agenda, and it was accelerated now through the pandemic. So we're very happy that we brought in 43 applications, and we're now moving into the public pitching event. So if you have nothing in your agenda for the 25th and 26th, please sign up. I will give you a bit more details afterwards. So this DX Leader series that we're doing today is the 11th edition, and it's basically bringing together the bright minds and the practitioners from the industry to discuss topics. I'm very glad to have this amazing panel today, also on behalf of the Swiss Cham. Really, really great. Obviously, this award is not possible without sponsors and the broad support from the ecosystem here in Singapore. So we have SG Innovate supporting us, we have EDB, and all sponsors and supporters. So thank you very much. To the next one, Clarissa. As I promised you, if you have nothing to do on the 25th and 26th, that's next week, please join our public pitching sessions. You will hear in 5 different subcategories the top 3 nominations that will be awarded with the winning of the subcategory. So please join in. You can vote. That's also something that we have introduced. You can actively participate, and I think that's reason enough to be there, apart from the great projects that we will be showcasing. With this, back to you, Lars. And you will be there as well, right, Lars?
I will be there, of course. Your partner in crime to get us through 5 subcategory winners to be announced after the public pitching site. So let's look into today's topic. It's sustainable innovation. So it's not sustainability, it's focusing on innovation. So our poll today, we want to know from the audience, where do you stand? And the question today, to get an idea on where you stand, what you think is a truly sustainable innovation is driven by mainly technology, customers, or people and culture? Technology, customers, or people and culture? What is the main driver to achieve sustainable innovation? So let's see what the audience is thinking there. Andreas, what's your tip? What comes out on top?
You know, again, it depends. As I always say, I think it should be driven by customers mostly. But as we will see today, there are examples where you know, customers don't know what they will like in 2 years or 3 years time. So.
Okay, let's close the poll and let's have a look. What's the result? People and culture. People and culture. Technology seems to be the least important driver. That's interesting. Customers only at 20%, and 3/4 of our attendees think people and culture are the main driver for sustainable innovation. That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. So let's directly start with diving into the topic, and kicking it off is Thomas Meyer. He's the Senior Business Solution Manager at Zuhlke. Thanks for enabling us for this session today. A big supporter of the whole DX Leaders series. Thomas wants to share a little bit about the topic and how it is relevant for Zuhlke. Thomas, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Lars and Andreas. So preparing the webinar, we thought that it will be interesting to see and hear about what kind of innovative projects companies are actually doing. But then we thought it will be even more interesting to see actually what they do in order to make sustainable innovation happen in their companies. So is it focusing internally on people and company culture, like we have seen in the poll now? Or is it focus on technology? Or is it focusing on the outside world, looking at what customers require or what customers need or what competitors do? Then, of course, you do everything, a little bit of everything. But if you have to choose your focus, which one would be your focus be, or your key focus of the company be? Then can we switch the slide, please? So if we look at a broader context, governments spend billions of dollars, and not like just like millions of dollars like companies, but billions of dollars in research and innovation. And we can be sure that they actually know what they do. And here we can observe different approaches. Some of them use more a top-down innovation approach, like Singapore with the Singapore Research Innovation Enterprise Plan, or China with the Made in China 2025 strategy, or Japan, which has this so-called Society 5.0 master plan. To give an example of Japan, 2/3 of the whole government spending in research and innovation goes to an area which is aligned with their strategy of Society 5.0. So it's a huge amount of money. And this is a well-written concept. It analyzes the current and future challenges of Japan. It shows a vision how society in future will look like, including environment, the inclusive society, etc., and what needs to happen in terms of technology development to make this vision become true. So it's a very well-written strategy. Then we have, in contrast, Switzerland. Switzerland does not have an innovation master plan, and it just focuses on good framework conditions for companies to be competitive and innovative. But Switzerland, despite not having such a nice master plan, it's still one of the leading countries for innovation. And taking it back to a company level, my question is, do we actually need innovation departments? Like, should innovation happen more top-down, giving a direction where the company needs to go? Or should the company rather focus on the the framework or like the culture and people to create an environment how employees and engineers can come up with new ideas. So I don't want to share my personal opinion here, but let me share a certainly more competent opinion here. So we come to the next slide. And we all know this gentleman here, Steve Jobs. So what he once said is, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. So we hire smart people, so they tell us what we need to do. And with that, I would like to open the discussion to our speakers, which I'm very grateful that they have accepted our invitation to join.
Thank you, Thomas. Let me introduce the full panel. We already heard from Thomas. We also have joining us today from IMD, Professor Jim Pulcrano. Hi, Jim. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, very well.
Excellent. From FWD, the head of innovation, we have Natalia Kozyura. Hi, Natalia. How are you doing today? All good?
Hi, Lars. Doing well. Nice to meet everyone.
Are you surprised by what the audience said? It's 3/4 people and culture, or you would always bet on that horse?
I would always bet on that horse. So that's accurate.
Good. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Marius Brand. He's the head of innovation Asia Pacific for DB Schenker. Hello, Marius.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Good. And Andreas, you wanna throw the first curveball or the great question to the panel?
Well, I actually didn't, as a very low-key Swiss citizen, I wouldn't start with citing Steve Jobs, but obviously I have to ask that question to Jim, obviously, right? So, I mean, it's a very ambiguous question because Steve himself was actually somebody that had a very clear idea, and I'm sure he was also telling people about his idea. So, I mean, do we know a innovation department in a company like Apple?
No, they don't. They don't have an innovation department. But I think what we heard others say, the audience said, Natalia said, is it's the people, it's the culture. And Jobs realized that, and his successors as well have realized, you need to bring in people who have a point of view, but you also, and this is the additional piece, have to create an environment, a context, so that they can challenge the status quo. Or if you're saying customer focus is your focus, that they can bring the customer into it. So it's both about bringing in the right people, but also setting the context for them to do what they think should be done. And typically that means challenging the status quo.
So means also if somebody wants to be, so any other company wants to be like DB Schenker, wants to be innovative, no innovation department? No?
So from my perspective, innovation departments have a certain role to play, and that is change management, as already mentioned by Jim. Innovation as change is hard. People don't always like change. It's new and uncertain, and then you need people to take them onto the journey, right? And those are the people who then work in the so-called innovation departments. They are change managers. I have to say, though, this is not a continuous thing. Innovation departments can come and go with a specific topic. You can't have a 30-year-long innovation department dealing with one thing. Then there would be things done wrong, but rather you point on a certain topic, right? But now we look at things like AI, where we need to drive it into the innovation. 20 years ago, we were looking at how to bring Office into the company. And for this, you need to a certain time then a change management department that we call innovation department.
Well, Marius, if I may, just obviously, I want to ask you the question. How many really groundbreaking innovations have you visited or have you seen at DB Schenker over the years that you have been there?
Well, it probably depends on the perspective what groundbreaking is. At DB Schenker, we, for example, recently had a true breakthrough when it comes to a cooperation with a startup. We invested in a company called Volocopter that may, if things go right, and we certainly hope so, will take us as a company onto a journey to become a different player in the urban mobility landscape. So that's a rather big thing, I would say. In general, though, I'm not really thinking about only disruptive innovation here, but rather incremental too. Incremental innovation is certainly helpful, is certainly necessary, and there you truly see a lot of change coming into a company steadily also.
Okay, and then maybe to the other head of innovation here, Natalia. What we just heard from Marius, sometimes it's disruptive innovation versus incremental change, right? So sometimes it's a better mousetrap, and sometimes we have to think, do we even need a trap? So how do you balance these things out when we do kind of go for the moonshot, and when we just have to incrementally change it bit by bit?
Yeah, I actually have quite a strong opinion here. So I don't believe in disruptive innovation.
Okay.
I don't think that exists. The incremental improvements, all the way looking at the customer experience from how they purchase, in our case, insurance, how we can automate it, how we can reduce number of steps, how we can make UI, UX richer and easier to use. That's the innovation that we at WD is focusing on. And it is definitely incremental, right? So some of the things my team has been building is eKYC solution, is simplifying that ID verification, data entry that the customer has to do, one thing. Customer servicing via chatbots, again, we're building that in-house, and every single week continue to improve in all the intents, the experience of those chatbots. There's number of automation, number of AI solutions that we're working on. And again, it's every day small improvement here and there. That's the innovation that I'm strong advocate of. And that's what we've been doing at WD now for a couple of years.
So then how do you do that how do you organize it? Is it in reference to what Thomas shared earlier? So in FWD, is it then a bottom up, top down, left, right? How do you make sure that then that incremental improvement idea sits with every employee at every level? How do you make sure that that is it then a cultural thing? Is it an institutionalization? How do you make sure that this actually happens all the time?
Good question. Yes, it's definitely bottom up. So people who are doing day-to-day work, either underwriters, customer servicing teams, agents, they understand, they are the ones who have the pain points. They understand the customer pain points, the business pain points the best. And based on that data, based on the information, there was quantitative usage data as well as qualitative that we get from those people. That's how we prioritize and stack rank the features. And the ones that we choose to work on are the ones that are going to impact our customers and business the most in terms of bringing value, and also the ones we can scale across all of our 9 markets. And that seems to work. And because it is up, bottoms up, everyone is on board by the time we start working on that solution.
Okay, so maybe over to Thomas. You know, from your point of view, what makes innovation sustainable, right? Is it just the people? How much does technology help to continuously keep you and your company and your customers on their toes with the need to do better and innovate?
Yeah, sustainable, that's a big word, of course. But I think the key is to implement a system. Like, it's not just a one shot, like now we do an AI project and then it's done. So that's why I think it's more creating the culture in a company, for example, have people, like have an environment of confidence, like people can freely speak up, they can give their inputs, it's well recognized. So more focusing on the framework conditions, like in the case of Switzerland, rather than like giving the direction what needs to be done. But that's, of course,
over to Marius. And how is it on the DB Schenker side? How do you make sure that it's not just you have to run around with a big whip and hey, innovate, but make everybody kind of a champion for the approach of wanting to improve?
Yeah, the big whip would certainly be rather counterproductive, that's for sure. it is something that isn't really set in stone, and I wouldn't say there are many processes or policies that guide this. There are a few key guidelines, but like for example, since innovation is that's one of my mantras. I always try to say that innovation is always important but never urgent. That is a very important thing. And this means don't give people another day job that should also be then independent from innovation. So if you have people that you want to focus on innovation, don't give them a second job too, because otherwise the second job will always be more urgent. That's at least for that specific innovation team. For the people who improve their daily business, basically, there are also a few rules that I follow. For example, I split having the idea from executing the idea. Those things are different. Different people are good at each. And you must never have the situation in which you reward good ideas with more work. So if you have some smart cookies that have ideas to do here and there, and then you say to them, great, now you do it as well on top of your job, then they will probably think twice before they share the next idea. Also, and this is maybe a little going into a different way, but it's actually also very important. Those idea owners then don't force them to continue with the idea, but also don't take the idea away from them. Often they have thought a lot about it, and then the idea owners, as I call them, should be part of the process, but it should truly be voluntary. But other than that, I don't really see a standard tool set, because it comes down to trust. If people feel like they are empowered to share their ideas, if they are not worried that they are shut down, if they're not worried that a failure could be an issue for their career in the future, and this is a big topic in many companies, then they will come to you and share. But if they're worried about either of these things, then they might not.
Yeah. So maybe I can just one follow-up question here, because obviously that's on everybody's mind, right? I mean, how innovation is really created in a big organization. I mean, we have a lot of constraints. So Jim, when people come to IMD and they attend your courses, or you go to these companies, they tell you what they will do, right? I guess when they leave your course, and then everything changes, and then you have all the daily constraints again. So is it possible to really create innovation and I mean step change innovation, not incremental, in a company setup? Or is IMD or maybe startups the right environment to create these innovations?
Well, I mean, first on the question of disruption versus incremental, I mean, I should nuance my thumbs up to Natalia. I do believe disruptive innovation can happen. I just think that we should not set that out as our goal. If you set disruption, I'm going to disrupt this industry. How many times do I hear that from startups? Yeah. I think that is completely the wrong way to go. Because if you do that, you're not focused on the customer, you're not focused on your company, you're focused on something else, disruption. So that's one nuance I'd add to this question about disruptive innovation. When I look at what companies, what they do when they come to us, and this is often the programs I work on, and we talk about this question that Marius just said about failure. And I'll ask, typically I'll have the head of the division or the CEO in the room. So when was the last time you stood in front of the troops and admitted a failure? And of course I get silence. And then even afterwards, at the end of the program, they'll say, yes, 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 we're going to be much more open about our failures. And then I'll check in a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, saying, so have you had that discussion? They haven't. So there's still that fear. And that goes back to what was said at the very beginning. It's all about the culture. If you can't create a culture where people, if they're going to innovate, they're going to be going out into the unknown. If you're going out into the unknown, everything you do is an experiment. If it is an experiment, we don't know the answer. So there's a chance that you're going to fail. So now this comes back to creating that culture where it's about learning. It's not about I do something, I fail, I lose my job. It's I do something, we fail, we succeed, whichever way, but we get data and we learn from that data and we get better. That's the culture that a big company or even a little company needs to have.
but I mean, how do you then, companies want to maximize their resources. One of the resources are people. So they want to make sure that they're as effective and efficient as possible. So how do you balance in an organization like, hey, we want you to spend time on thinking ideas that might not turn into something profitable versus just get your day job done? You know, it sounds, you know, from us here, sounds like easy peasy, but in a real scenario, I think Marius was alluding to that. How do I make sure that people have some kind of reward to even think, but then not kind of the punishment that they have to do the job or it's taken away? So I'm really trying to find the balance between how do you deploy your resources of wanting to have ideas that bring you forward, but accepting that a lot of those investments might not have returns. What do you tell people that you're interacting with, Jim?
I mean, again, to me, it's a culture question. I mean, if people, whether they're getting a monetary reward for their great idea, or just the fact that people respect them, hey, he's the guy or she's the person who goes out and tries new things. That's what people react to. And whether it's on top of their job or part of their normal job, you know, people will react to what is rewarded. So if you've got an organization, whether it's the CEO talking about it or your boss talking about saying, you know, we need new ideas, we need to find new ways to delight the customer or to cut cost or whatever it might be, that's what people respond to. Now you can go to a policy point of view, you know, going from Thomas's point, where, for example, like Google or 3M, where you say everybody's got 1 day a week to do as they please. That might get you some new ideas, but it also assures that the innovative people in your company stay with you. Because if they have to go outside the organization to play around with these ideas, they're going to leave you and do a startup. So that's maybe a policy way of doing it, of getting as much out of people as possible, but giving them that freedom that they can explore the new ideas that they've got.
So Thomas, my thesis would be this: what Jim is describing, that's not possible in a publicly traded company because of all the constraints. We're not going to go into all the details, but there is a reason why the venture capital ecosystem is actually there and why it's working as it is working. But if you look at Zuhlke, it's a partnership, right? So how is Zuhlke making sure that you are staying, you know, ahead and that you are innovating in a partnership model?
Also in Zuhlke case or in a consultancy company, of course, you have projects, customers, and that's the day-to-day business which you have to deliver. But then my opinion, personal opinion is clear. Like if you want to grow in a company, like you have two choices. You can work from 9 to 5, go home, enjoy your freedom. That's perfectly fine. But if you want to grow in a company, you can actually give more than that. Like you can be creative. And especially in a company like Zuhlke, we have so many excellent engineers. You can learn from each other. You can proactively create groups of people with similar interests. And you can create initiatives. And that's a great thing of working in consultancy companies. And actually people do. So we have this kind of bottom-up possibilities in our company. So
you have that in Zuhlke, this bottom-up culture?
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. And then if you are just, if your figures, you're not delivering your figure end of month, then everybody says, well, but you had a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the day-to-day business has to be done, and our mission is to make customers successful. I mean, that's the main reason why we exist. But then, of course, like it's up to you how you want to grow in a company, and this is not only like at Zuhlke. This is like in every organization. Is like how much are you willing to give back to the company? How much are you willing to contribute? Instead of just taking, you also give something back.
Okay.
Can I jump in for a second? Because you asked the question about whether a public company could do it. And that kind of assumes that, you know, they're only worried about the quarterly results, which we know is true. I just finished some work with a large life sciences company, publicly traded. And they know that if something has the possibility of impacting numbers, the share price, it has to be discussed. But what they did is they created what they called the innovation frame, saying, okay, for all of you out there, for example, in the marketplace, these are the guardrails. And within this, you can do whatever you want. You figure it out. If it starts bumping up against the guardrails, then we have to talk about it and say, how does this affect us as a public company? But I found it a nice way of giving people space to innovate, but at the same time, making sure that they didn't do something that would go against policy.
Yeah. And I guess corporate venturing is one instrument that you can use, to isolate kind of an environment within the corporate with own budget, with a separate set of measurements and so on, right? So you need to have this acceptance from the senior management that understand, looking at return on investment is not the right measurement. So that brings us to the next topic about measurement. Can you measure it, or is it just something that is hanging in the air somewhere?
Well, I mean, you have the well-known examples of companies citing their statistics on a percentage of revenue that came from products that were developed in, for example, the last 3 years. That's one way of measuring it. Yeah, I mean, that's a number that any company can use.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the measurement, same as I think any software solution that's been built, it needs to be measured. What's the impact? And the KPIs will be different. If it's a customer service or if it's automation tool, the accuracy, the automation, the value that it brings to the business. Because there's some innovative solutions that I've seen in the market. It actually takes more manpower and more effort for the company to build them and support them than how it used to be done in the past, which I don't think that's a successful use case. So yeah, we do like to measure every feature we build, what's the impact on the business, but it's a bit more on the solution type of impact. And then of course you consolidate all the solutions, the size of the team, the value we created in terms of tangible output, and also intangible in terms of the mindset using the new solutions. For example, the chatbots that we built, we're using 2 clouds, right? Like we're using Google Dialogflow for natural language processing, and we're running it in AWS. When we do handover of the chatbot to the local country team, by doing that, we are bringing the local country team, engineering team on board with the cloud adoption and explaining how the compliance work, making sure that it's all secure and we are following the regulation requirements. But it's basically that intangible value add of the teams and technical teams. So there is a bit of factor for that intangible value add, which is a bit harder to quantify. But overall, usually it's quite quantifiable in our case.
Okay.
And let me also add my 2 cents on this. I'm kind of jealous of Natalia because she has the good opportunity to have very measurable things. In our digital front ends at Schenker, we certainly have that too. For other things, like for example, the innovation teams that rather look at changing internal mindset or looking at AI projects where they take sometimes even years to become good so that we can use them. Actually, that is indeed a harder and even $1 million question. How do I measure that? There are many ideas floating around. Of course, the money that is potentially saved, the revenue that we could create with that, basically the ROI on that. Some companies measure actually the resources they spend on innovation. There are also completely different ideas like doing a 360-degree evaluation of the innovation team of the respective internal stakeholders. Also quite interesting. My personal opinion is I'm looking at innovation teams actually similar to how I would evaluate a startup. A startup also has assumptions about numbers, how it would look like in 5 years' time or so. But in the end, if you invest in a startup, you look at the idea and at the team. And for the innovation teams in a corporation, that is, from my perspective, not too different. So if you have an innovation team that can convince you as the senior leader that they truly help the company, that they have the team in place, that they have the idea in place to get the company forward, then this is basically the best KPI as an innovation team that you can have.
Maybe if I can add an interesting point is a few years back, I was working in a basic research center. And at that point, we were forced to write patents. Of course, nobody understood why we have to write patents, because I cannot just invent something out of the air. But then the reason behind was there's a correlation in the number of patents of actually compared to the useful patents. So the more patents you write, of course, you know, many of them are not useful, but actually the more you write, the more outcome you will have at the end. And that was the reasoning why everybody was forced to write patents in the research center.
Okay, let's move maybe to the idea of how much do larger organizations need startups to drive innovation, right? Because startups by default are normally born by the idea of changing things up. Not always, to not upset you, Jim, to always disrupt an industry, but a lot of times it's just a smarter, faster, better mousetrap approach, right? So how do you, maybe start with you, Jim, how do you think that startups are not just good, but necessary to foster the idea or kind of sledgehammer approach, bringing that innovation thinking to larger organizations through collaboration?
I think today, if you look at the best run large corporations, they all in one way or another collaborate with startups, whether that's, you know, licensing their technology, acquiring them, whatever. I mean, that's no long, that's 20 years ago where we said the two can't mix. But where you see a deliberate policy, it could be corporate venture capital. So let's just invest so that we keep an eye on what's going on, the leading edge of technology or the leading edge of new business models. That's one approach. The other approach is, you know, let's let those guys over in that startup try out this idea. We'll give them a bit of money. And that way, if they fail, it doesn't hurt our brand. Because, you know, for example, if I'm P&G, you know, every one of my brands is worth over $1 billion. Do I want to take a risk on them if I try some wild idea? Whereas I can try it with a startup, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, I don't take it on. Mm-hmm. Or if you're in the pharma industry, we know the cost of R&D is huge. So why not let a startup who can do it perhaps more quickly, take more risk, let them do it, and then acquire them after phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trials. So I think it's more a question of all the corporations are working with startups. It's a question of figuring out the right way to do it that fits with your corporate culture.
Marius, over to you. You said you're working with one particular startup. How does it work? Does it fit, or is there a little bit who's more shy working together, or it's just all easy peasy and you know, you have a cake and candles every day?
I think in a big corporation, if I truly told you it's also always easy peasy, then I would be lying and maybe try to do marketing. That's not the case. No. Especially in a company like DB Schenker, which is government owned. Right? So in our case, this corporation was truly driven by an innovation team and is now being put into the organization through, let's say, certain contact persons throughout the organization. And this works quite well. Can I say what side is more apprehensive? Not really. It's difficult, I think, from both perspectives to truly understand what the other side is doing. There is a rather simple method, though, to alleviate that at least, and that is having people on both sides that have experience with the other side. So if you have people in a corporation that used to work in a startup, or at least in a very small company, that certainly helps. And at the same time, if you then have a key account manager in a startup that came from a big corporation, then the mutual understanding is certainly already better.
Okay. Let's, we already got some good questions coming in, I see. So thanks for our audience to posting already some questions. Maybe I'll just move it to rapid fire, and then we can directly go into questions from the audience. Rapid fire, it's I'll throw the same question at all of you, and I just basically need a left, right, up, down, yes, no kind of answer. one sentence to elaborate why you chose, okay? So greenfield versus brownfield, what's easier to foster sustainable innovation? Jim.
Greenfield, I think, is easier, but brownfield is more sustainable.
Okay. Natalia.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I kind of addressed that question earlier today. Yes, I'll stick with my answer.
Okay, Marius?
For me, I go with Jim.
Okay, good. And Thomas? Greenfield versus
Many
brownfield.
engineers will not love me for saying that, but I'm more for brownfield because I see more potential in actually brownfield projects.
Okay, next one. Innovation program's biggest worry, people or policy? Thomas.
I pass.
Oh, no. People or policy?
Oh, you cannot talk, Thomas.
The biggest worry.
Yeah.
We don't accept.
For me, people. People is
Okay.
the key. Yeah.
Marius?
For me, the biggest worry is certainly policy. Things like hiring processes or procurement processes that can drag the best team down.
Natalia?
Yeah, policies take a lot of emotional, mental energy. Policy.
Jim, from your observation and experience?
I would say people, sorry.
Nothing to be sorry about. And last but not least, what's better for sustainable innovation? Leading or influencing?
I'll go with leading.
Okay.
Setting the example for everyone.
Okay. Marius?
It's a mean question. If I had to choose, I would say influencing, just because of the reason companies already have leaders, but not all companies have influencers.
Okay. Natalia?
I think leading, because it's more fun to lead.
Good. And Thomas?
Yeah, for me, for sure, it's leading.
Okay, good. Thank you. Then let's have a look at what's the question. What are the questions from the audience? Andreas, you want to pick the first one?
Lars, we're getting in amazing questions here. So let's look at obviously the people culture question. So biggest hurdle is transforming people and culture. That's a question by Eric Saint-André. So people culture is driving sustainable innovation, but the main problem is lack of a reward model. So motivating and rewarding people to contribute. So incentive systems and so on, and motivation is he's also writing here. So any tips on models that work? So how do you incentivize for innovation?
Yeah, I mean, different people are incentivized by different things. And I think that's what the first thing that has to be taken into account. Some are going to want a monetary reward. Some, for example, engineers, they just want to see this thing happen. If it's the sales guy, he or she wants to, get into the market. So, finding out the right, incentive for each person or each group, I think that's the key to the model. Not how much money to give them or when to give them money, but do they want money? Do they want recognition? Do they want to do the deal? Find the thing that's going to incentivize them.
So you would incentivize a salesperson for innovation?
Of course, yes. I mean, think about it. The salespeople are right at the forefront, right in the face of the customer. They probably see more opportunity for innovation than anybody in the R&D department.
Yeah.
So I would want to hear what they see out there.
Okay. Natalia?
Yes, I think in terms of the incentives, good question. I do think that starts at the top. So if you do create company goals, and one of the goals is improving customer service and automation, most of the stuff is done through technology, right? So, and then if you're able to quantify the solutions that you build within the innovation team or within the engineering teams, that will come back to those high-level incentives, the annual goals, the bonuses system. So I do think if you properly set up the company goals, the innovation will propagate through it.
Okay. Lars, I think we have some other questions.
Yeah, sure. let's look at Björn Setteroy. I hope I didn't slaughter that name. So he is obviously knows Jim. He says, a question to my favorite IMD professor. How can a company that has a mature and successful business balance innovation? Has a mature and successful business balance innovation with experimentation and be willing to take risks while not destroying the moneymaker, right? Don't saw off the hand that feeds you kind of thing.
Thank you, Bjorn. And I do remember you, Bjorn, one of my favorite students of all time. I mean, I think part of this could go back to that question of, collaborating with startups. So you let them take on the burden of failure, if you like. The other could be, the whole idea of skunkworks, where, let's let another part of the organization do it without being impeded by the successful part. But I think one thing you're pointing at is a dilemma for successful organizations with top management who has made their career at the company. In a sense, innovation is about destroying their legacy. So how likely are they to allocate resources to somebody who comes along and says, I've got this great idea, it's going to disrupt our whole business model. And you're at the top of the company saying, well, wait a minute, I just built my life on that. That's really hard. So that's where I think you have to find some other mechanism like skunkworks or a special innovation center or working with a startup to make that work.
Okay.
Thomas, from your perspective, when you're advising clients, how receptive or how do you try to convince them that sometimes, yes, this is your cash cow, but the rising stars are there. So how do you make sure that they don't over index one over the other? Or is it that's basically, hey, I'm the consultant, you make the decision?
Actually, it's not my job to tell customers what they have to do. It's actually my job is to help them to find out what they need to do. And quite often is what they want to do is not actually what they need to do. And my job as a business solution manager is actually to help them to understand like why they need to do something or not something what they want.
But
that's a very interesting point. So is that kind of the ambiguity of innovation? Is kind of knowing what you need versus knowing what you want? Is it?
I mean, there's some examples like when customers come to us, then they say, I want to develop this, but then actually we could just say, okay, let's develop this, and then here you are. But actually, quite often, not always, but sometimes it's not what they actually need. And so we can ask questions, we can have with like our experts from different fields look at it. We maybe the customer understands his business much better than we do. And so he needs to be sure that what he wants to develop is actually the right thing. And we can help them to find out whether this is the correct way he wants to go. But it's not that we tell them, now you need to develop artificial intelligence in your product.
Okay.
Maybe to the in-house guests here, Marius, right? I thought what Thomas just said about looking at what you want versus what you need. Do you ever, as an in-house department, get caught into, the board thinking that's what we want, and you have more information and maybe a better idea of that's what you want, but what we really need is something different?
Well, in the end, it's always an opinion, right? Maybe I think we need something different from what then the CEO would think we need. Do people have different opinions? For sure. In these situations, though, people have to look at the respective responsibilities of jobs. My job is then to challenge the status quo and to make sure that not only the current need is considered. whereas other people that look more into the structure of the company wouldn't have the other job to rather keep it steady. So companies have to intentionally balance this with roles that rather push the company ahead, and other parts of the company that don't allow it to change too quickly, because changing too quickly is also an issue that big companies have to face.
Then quickly to wrap it up to Natalia, right? So do you more often have to pull people back or push them to speed up?
Push people to speed up.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Can I ask one thing? Because Marius was actually addressing an important topic, and we will not send out the recording about the comment on the board and the CEO, but I think it's really about leadership in the end, right? So what traits do you think, just maybe 2 or 3 traits are really the right leadership for innovation? Just a question maybe to Jim.
Curiosity, very much so. Because if you're curious, you're going to ask good questions, and if you ask good questions, you're going to help others to see things that they didn't see otherwise, and probably both of you are going to learn something. And for me, that's a measure of innovations. How much did we learn?
Okay. Any other ideas?
I find startup experience being highly valuable, because people have been in the space where they move extremely fast, build solutions, might have not been as regulated of a space, but that mindset and finding the ways workarounds of certain roadblocks, I find that very valuable. Actually, every single person on my team is from startup.
Yeah. Marius, any ideas what you can see within DB Schenker?
So one aspect of the senior leadership that is truly important also for innovation is to have a certain vision. If you don't know approximately where you want to go, then you go into all directions. And then it becomes extremely difficult to basically keep the company on one path. So this is something I would add to the very important things that my colleagues mentioned.
Okay.
Hey, let's go to another question, another one from Eric here. What are your thoughts on ambidextrous organizational design? Ambidextrous, so left and right hand equally kind of balanced. Could 2 engines, execution and exploration, well integrated, be the way to drive sustainable innovation? Wow, that's a big question. Who want to try to answer that one?
Start.
Oh, thanks, Natalia.
Sure. So in terms of, I think I like to look at it as a funnel. Basically, every year we'll have about hundreds and hundreds of ideas of how we can innovate, what we can build, blockchain, IoT, artificial intelligence, automation tools, etc. And then we'll select the key ones that are the most promising based on that impact that we talked about earlier, and then build prototypes, very high-level prototypes within a sprint or 2, which is a couple of weeks up to months for those ideas. And quite a bit of prototypes don't see light of day because they are not as impactful as we originally thought, or to build it properly and deploy it in production is going to take so much time that it might not be worthwhile our effort as of now. So that kind of approach is funneling through lots of different ideas to fewer prototypes and actually fewer production, high impact solutions is the approach that my team has taken, that FWG has taken.
Okay.
I don't think there is a perfect organizational design that says, okay, if you do this, you're going to get great idea generation as well as perfect execution. But if you look at the structure of any organization, the pieces have to be coherent. And if what's driving the strategy is we have to be innovative, for example, to get our costs down or to delight our customers, then the other pieces of the organization design have to be aligned with that. Whether it's the way we reward people, the kinds of people we hire, the structure of the organization, where do the ideas come from, where do they go, what are the processes within the organization to share ideas, et cetera. So it's about coherence of the organizational design rather than there's a certain structure that you have to have for exploitation as well as for exploration. I'd look for coherence in that.
Yeah, but Jim, maybe, just to give also some clear answers to our listeners today, I think we can fairly say that in hierarchies, innovation is not as supported in the best way. Would you?
Let me tell you a tiny little story. Years ago, I had the chance to follow around the management team. Well, I can say it, it's old. So it was with Boeing, and they were working on the 777, the 777. And I have to say, after 3 days, I was, in a sense, almost angry by the hierarchical structure of this organization, command and control, et cetera. But then they took me on a tour of a jet that was being built. And when I understood the complexity of this thing, I understood why in that part of the organization, they were hierarchical. Other parts of the organization, not at all. So it's again about what you're focused on. And they were very much focused on this thing has to never fall out of the sky. Therefore, hierarchical command and control. So again, I know people want a simple yes, no answer, but it depends.
I was trying, okay.
I know.
Lars, maybe another question from our...
Sure. What do you think are some of the basic prerequisites and foundations a company should have towards creating and driving a positive culture for innovation? We touched on it a little bit, but maybe we can just make sure that we got that fully covered. As a question from the audience, what are some of the basic prerequisites and foundations for a company to really create that innovation culture? Who want to give it a try? Thomas?
Sure. I mean, I can give you my opinion on this. It's, I believe, as a company, you have to give the framework, like to give the opportunities to engineers, in our case, to actually be creative, to be proactive, to make events, like to make focus groups, to make things that can be seen and visible in the company, and that they're rewarded by like the visibility inside the company, that they get maybe promoted when they're more proactive, etc. So it's focusing on the framework conditions.
Maybe, thank you. And then maybe I want to, sorry to pick you out here, Marius, but you said you're a government-owned organization, right? That doesn't necessarily scream innovation in general perception. So how does, what are the kind of, how is the company approaching the cultural kind of journey to get everybody in a more innovative state of mind?
Well, I would not say those are mutually exclusive. Here, especially in Singapore, I've seen government connected companies that are really innovative. When I worked in China, to a certain extent, companies are connected to the government and they're also very innovative. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. It's rather about how a company is set up and structured in the first place. And certainly privately owned companies can also be very old-fashioned.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, Marius, it's also because China and Singapore is very far away from Germany, the headquarters. That's maybe an explanation.
For example, that example with Volocopter was certainly driven from the German head office.
Oh, okay. Very good. Excellent.
I would like to answer that question very quickly. Yeah. I think setting up very ambitious goals help a lot with innovation, because to achieve them, people have to think differently. They actually have to experiment and try different things, because doing the same thing as before wouldn't work. And that's kind of an approach that has been working well.
Okay. Good. I think we're coming to the end of our webinar today. I'll just want to summarize with a few quotes from you. Jim said, the salespeople are at the forefront of innovation, and you'd be interested to hear their ideas, because they hear also what customers want, what works, what doesn't work. I always say, it's the front line. Yes. Natalia shared that policy takes up most of the mental energy and is one of innovation program's biggest worry. Thomas shared that if you want to grow in a company, you should give more than that. Be creative. You have to be creative over there. Marius was sharing with us that if people feel like they are empowered, then they will feel encouraged to share ideas and make the change. And I think, you know, that kind of ramps it up. We talked a lot about culture and mindset. We talked about balancing what's needed from an organizational structure, an org chart, policies versus people. We talked about you have to give people a choice. It's important. Mario shared that, and Thomas was alluring to that. That you know you can only basically. There's a German saying, or in English, you can only lead the horse to the water. It must drink by itself, right? Sometimes it's not our job as to make the decisions, but prepare the decision. And I think that wraps it up quite nicely. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Jim, Thomas, Marius, and Natalia, and of course, Andreas. That was episode 11.
Don't forget Zuhlke, the sponsor.
Of course not. Zuhlke made today's episode possible. Thank you very much, everybody, for the audience to tuning in. And please also tune in again next week for our next episode, where we have corporate venturing. So we touched on that. So it's very, we'll most likely ask a few follow-up questions on innovation engine or mission impossible. We just touched on it with 2 questions, but next Tuesday, we'll really look into what do the people from SIA, BCG have to say on that big topic. So I'm looking forward to that. But for today, thank you, everybody. Thanks also SwissGem and Deloitte to making it happen. Thanks, Andreas, to having patience with me to ask more than just one question. And see you, everybody, next week again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.